think, you know, we're not going to move out of our houses and start a commune, you know, down in one of the parks in Atlanta like the occupiers are doing. There's got to be a sense of, you know, I still need to live my life and I need to feed my family. I can't just get rid of all my possessions. I don't think actually that's what he's saying. He's saying you have to say goodbye to the things that you're attached to. And if you can't look at an object or look at your house and look at your car and make a definitive detachment from those things, then they possess you. It is not you who possess them. So he's not just saying you have to part with the possessions. And in fact, the word possessions here, it is the word for the things you carry. It is, I think it's a participial version of a verb. The things we bear, the things we carry. Meaning, you know, the things you own. And it's interesting that he would use a word like that because he's almost trying to say, listen, these things, as it turns out, these things that you're carrying, they're actually a burden to you in terms of wanting to pursue deeper levels of discipleship at Christ's feet. These things aren't helping you. They're not enhancing your discipleship. They may be burdens to you if they are possessing you rather than you possessing them. If you're not able to have some definitive break with them and say goodbye to them. So we should be willing to not look at our possessions with the same fondness as one does a person. And that's another interesting thing. The fact that every other place that this word apotasomai is used, it is of breaking from a person. And he might almost be trying to be a little funny here. You know, if you have the same fondness or the same reluctance to say goodbye to a possession that you might to a person, if you're reluctant to say goodbye to those things in the way that you're reluctant to say goodbye to a person, then maybe you are putting too much weight and person and affection into those things. So he says in verse 33, so then none of you can be my disciples who does not give up all his own possessions. And I think the idea is to recognize the cost of discipleship. Though I'm not sure if he's always just referring to the material things. There are other things that can serve, that can weigh us down, that can be burdens to us being disciples of Christ. Let me just open it up real quickly, just with a word or two. What's something else other than just our material possessions that can prevent us, something we are attached to, hanging on to, that can maybe prevent us from pursuing Christ?
Desires for power.
Desires for power, that's a good one. You know, the whole idea of following someone else is not being in charge.
Yeah.
So that's a good one.
Our careers.
Or
we think we're excelling in our career, and we don't want to. We want to keep on,
we're climbing that corporate ladder, and that's all that's really important to us. Our careers can be an impediment.
Some sort of recreation.
Oh, yeah, recreation. Yes, recreation.
You'd rather go water skiing than go to the church. How's that?
Yes. Sometimes I would, but anyway. But listen, we're not talking about me. No, I was trying to think. Martha was reading a story to me the other day about the people who created Atari back way in the early 80s when you're pounding stones together. They have developed a new some new company called Innovative Recreation. And I'm sure it has to do with gaming or something, but the name just struck at me, and I'm thinking, do we need more ways to be recreational? I mean, it's like our whole society is based on our recreation, whether it's a game or a movie or whatever. Really, do we need more companies that their sole product that they offer is catering to our recreation? And do these things take our focus away from Christ? Now, as much as we think about it in this day, they still had this back in their day as well. They had, they had diversions. It just seems like we were overwhelmed with diversions. And do those take our attention off Christ? Yes, so the point is there's a lot of things just beyond raw material possessions that can take our focus off of Christ. The issue seems to be one of attachment to these things rather than just strictly possessing them. Possessing a house. Am I attached to the house? Can I say goodbye to it if something happened? Yes, ma'am.
Good works.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's a good one. Or we can be obsessive about good works and not.
We'll do our Christian duty as opposed to serving Christ.
That's a very. We can do our Christian duty rather than it being about serving Christ. That's a great example. Now Jesus repeats again what he's kind of bringing this passage, he's kind of rounding it out, so he repeats the phrase that he used in verses 26 and 27, and in the Greek it's the exact same. I think it's a little bit different in the English, but he says, none of you can be my disciples who do this, who do these things. And it reminds us that this is what the passage is about. Are we pursuing discipleship for Christ? So I think this kind of brings this application of what he said before. Pursue discipleship to Christ with the singularity of allegiance and be conscious of the impediments, the obstacles that are in our way of pursuing him singularly, or that we put in our own way of pursuing him singularly. Now, I actually intended to skip salt, but then I started reading about salt, and this whole passage, how he wraps this up in verses 34 and 35 is very interesting. And it goes back, if you were to have asked me before this study, what's the unifying theme of the parables? I would have said, I don't have a clue. I think I'm starting, as we're going through this, I'm getting a clue, which, that's amazing. I'm getting a better understanding. What seems to be the unifying principle? Yes, he talks about prayer. Yes, he talks about this and that. The unifying theme seems to be one of usefulness. So he said, listen, if you allow these things to get in your way as impediments to serving Christ, that affects your usefulness as a disciple, as a follower of Christ. And I think he wraps this up in verses 34 and 35, and then, of course, we have at the end of verse 35 this phrase that we saw several times in Matthew 13. So verse 34, therefore, salt is good, but if even salt has become tasteless, with what will it be seasoned? It is useless either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. So we're getting the sense from what he's saying here that he's still talking in kind of this cryptic sense, because some people will read that and say, oh, that's nice, and move on. We don't want to do that. We want to figure out what exactly is he trying to get here. We want to have ears to hear. So Jesus declares here at the beginning of verse 34, and as the NASB has, this connector, therefore. If you see therefore, you'd ask what is therefore. This therefore is going to wrap up the whole passage and basically bring another application about what is meaningful discipleship. Meaningful discipleship is useful discipleship. He says in verse 34, salt is good. And, this is the word we've seen several times. The word good is a generic word, kalos. Salt is good. Well, how do you mean salt is good? Well, what exactly does that mean? Well, we talked about this before, but I want to add another dimension to what it means good. It's an extremely generic word. But I want you to think about, from a first century person's mindset, especially a first century Jewish person's mindset, good. Good is repeated several times in Genesis 1. God creates something and says, it's good. What does that mean that it's good? Well, it can mean a lot of things, but I'm thinking what the ultimate fundamental meaning is, it's working the way it was created to work. Okay, I put the thing there, and there are planets and moons, and everything is spinning around. Everything is working the way I intended for it to work. Now, in the Greek, with the Greek word kalos, there's some roots in Platonic, as in Plato, philosophy, in Greek philosophy, where they wanted to talk about the good citizen, or the good city, or the good governor. What do these people, what does the good citizen do? Well, he does what he was created to do, what he was designed to do. What does the good governor do? He rules in an appropriate way to what he was supposed to do. It's basically people who are functioning in intentional, purposeful, and useful ways. Now, that might seem like a lot to read into this word, but this idea of usefulness is going to come out in the passage. I think that's ultimately, often when we see this word good, we think of like, oh, it's pretty, or oh, it's nice, or oh, it's fluffy. I think that there's something a little more profound and functional. It is working the way it's supposed to work. So salt is good. Well, what makes salt good? Well, it's salty. You know. Now, interestingly enough, let's see here. It says salt is good, but then it says even if salt has become tasteless. The word tasteless is the word moranthe, related to the word moron, from which we derive the word moron. It is the word for a fool. It is used in an adjectival form several times, moros. You might want to jot down with this word in particular, to become a fool. Romans 1:22, where Paul says, professing to be wise, they moronized, they became foolish. 1 Corinthians 1:20, where is the wise man? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? So it's the word moranthe. It is a word that means to become foolish, related to the word, the adjective moros, and it means exactly like what we have today, the word moron. And what is he trying to say here? It is something that is useless, it is tasteless, it is not doing what it was intended to do. Like, I don't mean to keep repeating the word because it's so, but you know, like a fool. What does a fool do? Well, he doesn't do what he's supposed to do. He has no meaningful value in society, in the church, in the people of God, or anything. He's just acting in foolish, self-destructive ways. And that's not what we were designed to do. We were designed to work in ways that are compatible with God's intended plan. So he says salt can be good, but it can also become useless or tasteless. And then with what will it be seasoned?
Did they use salt as a preservative?
Yes, they would use salt as a preservative. They actually had a wide array of uses for salt. In fact, we'll get into that in just a minute when we look in verse 35, why Jesus picks these particular two uses for salt. So I did a little bit of reading about salt. Now, let me mention something else that I think is key about why he uses salt. As in English, so also in the Greek, sugar is sweet, rainbows are colorful, what else? Lemons are sour. Salt is salty. Okay, the word itself, I mean, somebody at some point tasted salt and thought, well, it's not sour, it's not sweet, I don't know what it is. It has a very unique essence to it. Rather than make up a word, I'm just going to call it salty. So there seems to be the sense that salt needs to live up to its name to be useful. And if it is not living up to its name, then it is being useless. So, you know, how does salt lose its saltiness? Well, I'm going to give you two views. You know, one individual said that apparently salt could, in some contexts, lose its effect. Sometimes what they did, they would use salt in an oven as like a catalyst for the heat to cook food or something like that. And eventually, then the salt would get burned, and you don't want to, you know, it basically then it is useless. Another view would say that, well, salt, Jesus being ironic, salt doesn't become useless. It's always salt. It can't suddenly become less salty, even if you grind it up and it's still salt. So it could be that Jesus is just being ironic. And let me step back and jump to application. If we're going to be called by the name of Christ, we better be Christy. We better reflect the name of the one we claim. if we're going to be salt,